T2 hydromechanical sensor removal. The T2 hydromechanical sensor, or fan inlet temperature sensor, is mounted to a bracket on the fan case at approximately the 2 o'clock position aft looking forward. After cutting the safety wire, remove the shroud drain lines P7 and P8. Remove the fuel shrouds which cover the connections. Then disconnect the P7 and P8 fuel tubes from the sensor. After removing the unions and discarding the preformed packings, disconnect the 4 clamps that secure the sensor lead to the fan case bracket. Remove the bolts and washers that secure the probe to the fan case. Then remove the 2 forward bolts and nuts and the 2 aft bolts, spacers, and nuts that secure the sensor to the fan case. Finally, remove the sensor and bracket and pull the probe and gasket from the boss in the fan case. T2 hydromechanical sensor installation. After placing the sensor in position with the mounting bracket, secure it to the fan case. Tighten and torque the bolts to the recommended limit. After placing a gasket over the boss in the fan case, install the probe into the port. Secure with nuts, washers, and dampers. Tighten and torque and then secure the capillary tube to the bracket with the 4 hinge clamps. After installing newly lubricated preformed packings and installing the unions, lubricate new preformed packings into the drain shrouds. Then connect the fuel tubes to the sensor ports. Tighten and torque. Perform a leak test as stated in the proper maintenance manual. Next, connect the drain shrouds to the sensor and hand tighten. Connect the drain lines to the drain shrouds and tighten and torque to the recommended limit. Perform a leak test of the fuel line shroud fittings. This completes the removal and installation of the fan inlet temperature sensor, or the HM-T2 sensor. T1.2 sensor removal. The T1.2 sensor, or inlet temperature sensor, is mounted on the forward fan case at the 10 o'clock position aft looking forward. First, disconnect the electrical connector from the sensor. Then, remove the grounding cable on the sensor by removing the bolt. Remove the bolts, washers, and nuts that secure the sensor mounting bracket to the cable support brackets. Then remove the bolts which secure the sensor to the fan case. Keep the bracket, washers, and dampers. Pull the sensor from the port in the fan case and install a protective cap on the electrical connector. T1.2 sensor installation. After placing the gasket onto the sensor, install the sensor into the mounting pad. Note that the electrical receptacle on the sensor must be facing down toward the 9 o'clock position aft looking forward. At the lower 2 bolt holes, install a damper, the mounting bracket, and 2 bolts. Next, attach the sensor mounting bracket to the cable mounting bracket. Tighten and torque to the recommended limit. Tighten and torque the sensor mounting bolts. Install the grounding cable onto the sensor with the bolt. Connect the electrical connector to the sensor. This completes the removal and installation of the T1.2 sensor. N1 electrical sensor removal. The N1 electrical sensor, or the fan shaft speed sensor, is located at the aft end of the number 3 fan frame strut. First, disconnect the electrical lead from the connector. After cutting the safety wire, remove the 2 mounting bolts. Then carefully pull the sensor from the port. After installing a protective cap on the connector, remove and discard the O-rings. N1 electrical sensor installation. Note that prior to attaching the fan shaft speed sensor, Measure the zero load spring height. Consult the proper maintenance manual for the correct limits. After installing newly coated preformed packings in the grooves on the sensor lead, remove the electrical cap and carefully insert the sensor into the port. Install the lightly lubricated bolts and torque to the recommended limit. Finally, connect the electrical connector and hand tighten. This will complete the removal and installation process of the N1 electrical sensor. Control alternator removal. The control alternator is located on the forward side of the accessory gearbox. First, disconnect the electrical plug from the stator housing connector and place a protective cap on it. Then, remove the safety wire. Next, remove the bolts and washers that secure the stator to the accessory gearbox. Remove the stator from the gearbox pad. Then, remove the nut and remove the alternator rotor by sliding it off of the shaft. Control alternator installation. Making sure that the longer end of the rotor faces the gearbox, slide the rotor onto the gearbox shaft. Then secure the rotor with a nut. Tighten and torque the nut to the recommended limit. Lightly coat the preformed packing with engine oil and install it onto the pilot diameter of the stator housing. Install the housing on the gearbox pad. Next, install the bolts and washers. Tighten and torque them to the recommended limit. Finally, connect the electrical connector and hand tighten. This concludes the removal and installation of the control alternator. Integrated drive generator air oil cooler and control valve removal. The IDG control valve is located on the fan air duct between fan frame struts 5 and 6, between the air duct and the IDG air oil cooler. After disconnecting the electrical connector and placing a protective cap on the opening, disconnect and remove the 11th stage control air line. Then, remove the couplings that attach the valve to the duct and to the cooler, and carefully remove the control valve. It may be necessary to manually lock the valve closed using the lockout lever and bolt provided to aid in the removal installation process. Next, remove the IDG air oil cooler by first disconnecting the oil in and oil out lines. Then, remove the 4 bolts from the mounting bracket. Carefully remove the IDG air oil cooler. Place protective caps on the openings. Integrated drive generator air oil cooler and control valve installation. First, position the IDG air oil cooler onto the mounting bracket and connect with bolts and washers. Tighten and torque to the recommended limit. Then, after removing the covers, align the pins and position the valve onto the mounting boss. Install the coupling nut. Torque to the recommended amount. Connect the 11th stage air tube to the union in the valve and torque. Making sure the properly lubricated preformed packings are in place, replace the oil in and oil out lines. After installing the electrical connector, this will complete the removal and installation of the IDG air oil cooler and control valve. For a more detailed description of this procedure, consult the proper maintenance manual. Hydromechanical N1 speed sensor removal. The hydromechanical N1 speed sensor is mounted to the fan frame at the 2 o'clock position. The fan duct has been removed for ease of viewing in this program. First, disconnect the overboard drain line. Be prepared as some fuel may drain. After removing the safety wire, disconnect the knurled nuts from the PBR and P8 ports on the sensor. Remove the preformed packings and discard. Then, disconnect the PBR and P8 fuel tubes from the sensor. After removing the unions and discarding the preformed packings, remove the bolts, washers, and nuts that secure the sensor to the fan frame adapter. Slide the sensor back until the spline clears the mounting pad and remove the sensor. Hydromechanical N1 speed sensor installation. After installing newly lubricated preformed packings on the sensor, place the sensor onto the fan frame, making sure not to damage the spline. Secure the sensor with bolts, washers, and nuts. Tighten and torque to the recommended limit. After installing newly lubricated preformed packings and installing the unions into the sensor ports, connect the fuel tubes to the ports. Tighten and torque. Perform a leak check as stated in the proper maintenance manual. Lubricate and place the new preformed packings into the knurled nuts. Connect the nuts to the sensor. Hand tighten and safety wire. Connect the overboard drain line. This then completes the removal and installation of the hydromechanical N1 speed sensor. For a more detailed description of the procedure, consult the proper maintenance manual.